Well, police in the UK have finally taken action against pro-Palestine protesters, arresting almost 900 people in London over the weekend. Palestine Action is a prescribed group now under UK anti-terror laws after military planes were vandalised and defence firms were targeted by protesters. Here's the latest from Sky News UK.
There were pockets of tension and hostile clashes as some were hauled off, resisting arrest. Palestine Action is a proscribed organisation, banned by the government under the Terrorism Act, following a campaign of criminal activity, including this attack at RAF Brize Norton.
Let's go to News Corp European correspondent and Sky News contributor Sophie Elsworth joining us from London. Good to talk to you again, Sophie. This is a big development, isn't it? Because there's been so many protests and so many of them have been ugly and hateful, and there's been violence in the past. But to make this many arrests surely signifies a bit of the change in approach from the police or the government or both?
Well, Chris, really not a weekend goes by here in London now where there is not a protest. But the police can't really keep up with this. I mean, 900 arrests is a huge amount. And often they have to arrest these people and then let them go straight away. They don't have enough holding cells to keep these people who are under arrest. So this is a debacle for the police force here in the UK. And the number of protests is rising here, Chris. Every weekend, there's numerous protests, often related to Gaza or Israel or relating to the issue that we have here with the arrival of illegal migrants, Chris.
Yeah, that would be a different group protesting against those illegal migrant hotels and the like, but they've been very dramatic, those protests as well. When we look at the pro-Palestine or anti-Israel protests that are so dominant there in London, and we have a lot of trouble ongoing here in Australia as well, as I've highlighted at Bondi Beach over the weekend. But increasingly, surely it's obvious to everyone that, well, of course there are good-hearted people who want to protest for a Palestinian state. And of course there are good-hearted people who believe Israel's been too heavy-handed and they want to support some sort of ceasefire. But there are a lot of extreme elements in here. And it's not just Islamist extremists involved in it. It's also radical socialists and the like, anarchists who just are jumping on this movement to create as much trouble as possible. Is that the sense you get in the UK?
Well, Chris, really there's a mixture. And on the weekend, we did see at this protest that was outside the Houses of Parliament, we did see elderly people arrested. There were some women I saw images of that were in their 80s being arrested. And they're the images that often go viral. People are questioning, why are the police arresting such people? So unfortunately for these protesters, there in all sorts of protests, there are ones in there that cause more trouble than others. There are, of course, peaceful protesters. So really, Chris, it is a mix, but 900 arrests on the weekend is certainly a very large number.
Extraordinary, yeah. Now, you mentioned those protests about the illegal immigrants, people wanting the government to get control of its borders, an argument we're all familiar with here in Australia. Nigel Farage, who's on track incredibly without really an organised political base. He's leading in all the polls. He wants to stop the boats. Here's Nigel Farage.
We will stop the boats and we will detain and deport those who illegally break into our country, doing what nearly every normal country around the rest of the world does. You cannot come here illegally and stay. We will stop the boats within 2 weeks of winning government.
Yeah, well, I was going to say it's easy to say that. It's actually not easy to say stop the boats. You get criticised just for saying it, but it's even more difficult to actually do it. And you reported on the weekend, Sophie, that he's been getting the best advice because he's actually been meeting with Tony Abbott to try and work out how he can actually put a plan together that will stop the boats.
Well, Chris, look, the pair have known each other for some time. Obviously, Tony Abbott was extremely successful in stopping the boats. I often get asked here about how the Australian government, when Mr Abbott was Prime Minister, how did he do it? I was at the Reform UK conference on the weekend, and many people were talking about this issue. It seemed to be high on the agenda in Birmingham of how do we stop this illegal migrant problem. But Chris, just here in front of the Daily Mail, there's a headline here, 30,000 reasons why Labor won't stop the boats. Now, they've had over 1,000 people arrive on Saturday here, one of the largest numbers of illegal migrants in any given day. This number, 30,000, is the highest for some years up until this point now. They cannot get control of it. Nigel Farage says if he wins government, he will stop it within 2 weeks. He's now walked that back and said, when legislations change, he will stop this within 2 weeks. So he's had to be careful around his wording here, Chris, because people will hold him to that when he's saying if he wins the election, he'll stop it within 2 weeks. Now he's saying it depends on various legislation being introduced that enables him to do so. Indeed.
I think he could do bugger all in 2 weeks. He will need the legislative changes, you would think, as we found out here in Australia. Just quickly, he's doing so well, Nigel Farage and his reform movement, that some of the Conservatives say they should amalgamate with him.
Well, they are indeed, Chris. I spoke to Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, who was a former House of Commons, a Tory minister under Boris Johnson on the weekend, and he said that he hopes that the Tories and Reform at the next election could unite and form similar to the coalition in Australia with the Liberals and Nationals. But I'll tell you one thing, Chris, no one is laughing at Reform now. They only have 4 seats in the House of Commons. There is not meant to be a general election till 2029, but I can assure you that every political party is taking Nigel Farage and Reform extremely seriously because they are dominating in the polls and they are continuing to set the news agenda. And as we know, Chris, Labor had a major overhaul of its, various ministers last week. So they are in damage control as well.
Indeed. All over it as usual, Sophie. Thanks for joining us. Sophie Elsworth there live in London. There's a lesson there for Susan Lee and the coalition, isn't there? Because Nigel Farage knows what he stands for and he enunciates it clearly and strongly. That's what you got to do from opposition.